In the name of Christ who calls us. Amen.
Amen.
Day 11 or 12 or something of this virus. Not contagious anymore, but still a little woozy. It's always a dangerous thing when a liberal arts graduate starts talking about science. So bear with me a little bit. But I did take notes. I was watching a program on Nova this week about the Kepler Space Telescope and its mission to discover Earth-like planets in our galaxy. They're not the Earth is not absolutely unique. It is fabulously rare, but given the sheer number of stars, scientists are actually finding analogs to planet Earth. And the key thing they search for that is particularly important and difficult to find is a planet that has liquid water. They call this the Goldilocks zone. Planets in the Goldilocks zone, which are not too hot, too close to the sun, so that water is not in liquid form but in gas form, or too far from their sun, their star, so that they wind up being frozen. So you've got to find it in that just right, that sweet spot. And apparently this is a rare thing. Water. Water. 4.5 billion years ago, our planet did not have any water on it. It was a waterless planet. It took a couple 100 million years for water to begin to appear, but when it did, apparently it rained. They had 12,000-year rains. We think we have it rough here. 12,000-year rains. And originally the whole surface of the Earth was covered with it. Now only 74%, they say, which is about the same percentage of water in our bodies. We are about 74% water ourselves. And the saline content of our blood and our tears matches the saline content of the ocean. It is the ocean, it is water, that produces most of the oxygen that we breathe. All of the oxygen originally that was on the planet from the plankton. And now, even so, we talk about the importance of planting trees, and it is important. But it's most of our oxygen still comes from the ocean. And of course we know that the whole cooling and heating system of the planet is all tied up with water, with those mysterious polar ice caps and the Gulf Stream and El Nino and La Nina and so on. All of this water is God's water. It is the waters of creation. In Genesis, water is created second after light, only after light, and the dry ground appears out of it, as happened on this planet too. So when we think about the baptism of Christ, and we think about all of this amazing water, what does it mean for Jesus to go into those baptismal waters? We hear John today in that reading in Matthew say, I shouldn't be baptizing you, you should be baptizing me, because the Johannine baptism was very much associated with a change of life, with a turning towards God. And clearly Jesus was someone who wasn't in grave need of turning toward God. There is an Orthodox teaching about Jesus' baptism that says that the blessing actually went the other way. that Jesus entering those baptismal waters was a way of claiming and reclaiming the original blessing of the waters, of saying that God's presence and action is alive in all creation, that the material world has been blessed with divine union. When we baptize in the Episcopal Church, it's usually a pretty tame affair. We have a little basin and a little pitcher, and we sprinkle a little around, and some of us get wet. We try to at least get everybody a little bit wet. But Jesus was immersed in this story in the Jordan River, recalling the salvific work of God, bringing the people across the Jordan in liberation, which also recalled their coming through the Red Sea on dry land. This is about cataracts and floods and rivers and seas of water, not little bits and drops. And in our psalm today, we don't have a watchmaker God sitting back in the heavens, calmly. We have God riding the waters, enthroned upon the waters. You see those pictures of Niagara Falls frozen? Looks like a perfect throne for a really big divinity. When I was in my 20s, I spent some time, I lived in Ontario, and we used to go hiking in the Niagara Gorge a lot, and we'd just go and sit, and downstream from the falls, the gorge gets very, very narrow, and so that water is extremely deep and just flooding through there, and the noise is deafening. And part of the sound, which is so impressive, is the sound of boulders being tossed around down below. You can hear them clacking against each other under the water, under the power and the force of that incredible, beautiful water. The psalm today is reminding us of the power of water. Think about the Missoula floods that came through and scoured out our own Columbia Gorge. Baptism is a symbol of our immersion in the life of God the Creator and the Restorer of all life. It's a big thing. We just use a little water, but a little water is part of the big water. All water is God's water. And those drops are reminders of the floods. Those drops are reminders of the oceans and the rivers and the vastness and the greatness of our loving Creator God. So that the waters of baptism remind us both of our first and our second birth, and of our union with God and God's purposes, and our union with God and God's power, God's mighty power for creative transformation. Isaiah today talks about the Messiah as bringing compassion and justice. There is that tenderness in which he will not break the broken reed or snuff the little flame. There is also the work of God through the Messiah bringing about justice for all. My friend Shelley Fayette talks about justice and compassion being two sides of the same coin. The compassion is God's love toward us as individuals, and justice is God's love towards us as a society, as a collective. So that when we come to remember our baptism, as we are called to do on this feast of the baptism of Christ, we are called to claim that transformative power of God to be at work in our lives in both acts justice, in the ways in which we care for the least among us, for our children, for our elders, for those in any kind of need or trouble, but also in the ways that we address the larger issues in society that prevent all of God's people from thriving. But we do not do this work on our own. We remember the mighty power of God in those flood waters, in those baptismal waters. We immerse ourselves, we remind ourselves that the water of God's salvation inhabits our bodies and empowers our lives. And empowers us as Christ's body and to be Christ's body. It is an invitation to unleash that power, that it might roll down like mighty waters in an ever-flowing stream. We don't all have the same work. It's not everybody's job to end poverty or homelessness. Not everybody's job to take care of the planet or nurture the children and the elders. We all have different emphasis, all have different work. And some of us are called more to focus on the large scale, and some of us are called more to focus on the individual. But all of us, every one of us, is called to draw upon those mighty, flowing baptismal waters and allow them to flow out of us, whether they are branching out into tiny rivulets that nurture or giant streams that change the course of things. All of those waters are God's waters. All of them flow back to the sea. So I invite you in the next few moments to a moment of quiet to ask yourself, how am I now opening myself to this power? How am I making myself available to God's power, that I might release it in the world in acts of compassion and justice?